Hi guys, welcome to Devlog number 5. Today I'll be talking about A-star pathfinding and the navigation mesh system in the Blender game engine and how I'm leveraging that for my game The Shadows Lengthen. But first, thanks to my patrons. Without you guys, the project would be dead in the water. Thank you to Manolis Parakis, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, for your support. You just signed up, that's a new patron. Anyway, so without much further ado, let's jump right into it. Here you can see in front of me is the navigation system that I have currently tested and built for the game. So if I press P, right now you can see there's a red dot and a blue dot. And that's just the player, which I can control here, and the AI, which has no ability to track down the player. So this is using A-star pathfinding, where I need to create a navigation mesh, a triangle-based mesh, that lets the monster know how to get to the player and what obstacles to avoid and how to traverse the terrain, because it needs to know that. And luckily, Blender has this built right in. So if I click the actual mesh that I've built here, and you can see it has all the obstacles built into it, and it's whatever you want. So we could even, just for fun, add another obstacle, and let's put it right over here. Now, if I go over to the Scene tab, which is the same in, I think, pretty much every Blender build, but obviously the more recent ones don't have the Blender game engine. Anyway, so if I click build the navigation mesh, it'll automatically generate this funny looking mesh that has all these triangles. And this is what the pathfinding in Blender uses for AI. So if I run it now, it'll be inert, because what I need to do first is I need to select the player monster, or the AI, and I need to select as the target the nav mesh that I just created. Now, when I press P and test it, the player moves, but also you can see now the monster is finding its shortest distance and navigating those obstacles, and that's using A-star pathfinding. So my game uses this same exact system. The only issue is that it only exists with this single actuator within an actual generated mesh, but as you know, my game is open world, which means that the terrain blocks are randomly generated, and that means that the navigation mesh cannot be set in stone. It actually needs to update or change. So in game engines like Unreal or Unity, they'll automatically update this mesh on the fly, and this happens in the game engine. But unfortunately for me, I don't have that. So what I'm using is a clever little hack to get around that. And to explain that, I've made this little video here to show you guys exactly the methodology for how I'm going to be getting around that. My game operates with these terrain blocks, and they interchange with each other, and they can be randomly joined together in different ways, and that's the open worlds. That's the terrain, the objects, the trees. But then on top of that, there needs to be a navigation mesh that informs the player and the monster how to find the shortest path to that player. So unfortunately, they're all separated by gaps and their individual navigation meshes. So I need to connect each navigation mesh so they all work as a whole. And to do that, I'm creating a system called exit objects. And here you can see an example. So if the player moves anywhere within a navigation mesh, an exit object will be a proxy for the player. So regardless of whether they're on that mesh or off the mesh, even if they travel in other directions, that exit object will travel to the last known point for that player on that point of the navigation mesh. So for example, now when it finds its shortest path to the player, you can see the exit point is going to mark the last point that the player occupied that terrain block, and then it's going to use that exit point as a finish line to bring it to the next terrain block that the player had occupied. So in essence, each terrain block is keeping in temporary memory where the player currently is and where the player exited the block. Now you can see below there's little binary markers, and that's to signify that I'm going to have a system of lists, and this list will keep track of whether or not the block is activated or not. So if a player is on a block, it's deactivated. If a player leaves a block and was just on that block is now active, which means the monster needs to traverse that block to get to the player. once the monster has arrived at the block, it will become deactivated, and then the monster will move up in its priorities to the next block. So with these exit markers constantly updating, this allows each navigation mesh to function as a whole. Another good example here is now it's finding the shortest distance, but this is if the player goes in a different direction. Now you can see the exit block is marked. This is not entirely realistic. They would both be on the corners, but essentially these are the 2 points that bring the monster to the new navigation mesh to find the shortest possible distance. So essentially it's kind of, you're taking all the navigation meshes regardless of their order, and then you're daisy chaining them together, and these exit blocks or exit points are the link that connects these points. So this will be done in Python, and it will just govern a series of behaviors that allow the monster to travel towards the player and deal with each navigation mesh regardless of whether it was randomly sourced by algorithm. Anyway, so that's currently the project, and that's how I'm solving the AI in the game. So if the monster sees you on this block, and then you're on 2 blocks north of that monster, it'll still charge towards you, but it won't be charging towards the player. It will be charging towards the exit block that brings it to the block where it will charge towards the player. Anyway, this is what I'm using. I'm very interested, so I'm going to put this up on YouTube to see what everyone says. And I'm also interested in what the Blender community says, and of course my patrons. You all see it first, and I'd like to hear your feedback, of course. I would say that this is a homegrown, handmade way of putting this together. Anyway, I'll sign off here, and that's currently what I'm working on. Thank you guys very much for your support.